Welcome on to the Newcrown podcast. I am back with another episode, another guest. My guest today is an old friend of mine who I don't think we have worked together on a film
Not
together, but
really, not yet.
we knew each other from a mutual friend of ours, and
Yeah.
this guest of mine is a film composer. So yeah, you want to introduce yourself?
My name is Rodrigo Murillo. I'm a film composer. I also work as a music editor and sound editor, and I worked on sound effects and sound design as well in the past. Basically, I dedicate most of my time to working on films, whether it is on music or, like I said, sound effects or anything related to sound. I've been working. In music, I guess, in film music particularly for about 6 years, 7 years probably now. And at the time I'm living in Toronto, and there you go.
So how did you get into the music in the first place? Like how did that come about?
I guess I, I I started. It all started, I guess, when I was like 9 or something. I started playing the violin. I was playing in school. Like we had like a little orchestra at school, and I really liked playing the violin. That was great, and that was kind of what got me into, I guess, classical music in the first place. I wanted to pursue the conservatory to, basically just go for a more of an academic type of musical formation, and that's what I did for a while. I didn't really stay in the conservatory, but shortly after I just knew that that's what I wanted to do. I guess I picked up the guitar and I started playing, I guess, metal first. I was really obsessed with prog metal, and I had a phase, and but that was great actually. I still like it. It's just that that's what kind of got me into I guess playing music like all the time. I used to do it all the time with my friends, and I guess later on I just wanted to do music production. Actually, that's what I started
Oh,
when I got into music school. Yeah,
so how'd you go from music production to like film scoring? Like how did
right.
that?
Yeah, that's I mean, when I was in school, when I was in music school, after I guess I was like 18 or something at the time. I was in my second year of my music bachelor's degree, and I had this one class. It was musical analysis, and we would listen to like many styles of music, and we got to film music, particularly like scores. And I remember the first time I started like actually analyzing the music that was made for a film. I was like that was like a big moment for me. I felt that I was very, very connected to the way, I guess, a composer kind of like, I mean,
Do you remember the
uh,
composer's name? Do you remember the composer's name?
well, I mean, there were quite a few of the scores that I actually, but I guess for me it was Clint Mansell, probably.
Okay.
There's been a few others for sure. I was a big fan of Morricone at first as well. Italian films. I used to like Italian films at the time. I used to analyze, I guess, for that class some of his scores for some of the films and he's made. And I guess after that class, I was just like, okay, I kind of like switched paths, and I was about to take a bunch of classes for production,
Hmm.
and I just switched to well, there was not really like film scoring classes back then
Mhm.
at the
Yeah.
school I was, but I just started doing like composition and writing for orchestra and stuff like that. So
Interesting. So like, so classical music was something that you always like kind of liked, or was it something that just kind of like fell through because of school? Was it?
I mean, yeah, not really. It was not really something I always kept like, but I guess I found it very interesting at the time. My mom when I was very young, she used to play a lot of classical music at home,
Mm.
and I used to listen to that a lot when I was a child, and for some reason it kind of just always stayed with me. And I guess that's what sort of, I guess it made me feel a little bit like, you know,
Nostalgic.
reminiscent of my,
Yeah,
yeah, I
and
guess.
nostalgia. Yeah. Okay.
I guess, but that's shifted with time, and later on, it's like I kind of like grew. I mean, I just it's not that I got bored of classical music, but I just wanted to like explore more of the contemporary
Hmm.
styles in composition in general. and I discovered a bunch of other composers, more contemporary composers,
Mhm.
and that's where I found film music so interesting. So yeah,
So like it's interesting how like school actually or like oriented you towards a new kind of avenue, but we're still relating to
yeah.
your like. So like, what were the films that you kind of watched and really liked the like the score per se? Like, what were the specific films?
Well, there's been quite a few. I guess one of the styles that I've been really into the past few years has been like I used to call it like post minimalism.
Mm.
Yeah, so we usually we get a lot of that in like modern films. For example, if I take as an example, see, Zimmer is not Hans Zimmer is not necessarily a great example in this case,
Mm.
but if you take something like um, I don't know, have you watched Dune, for
Yeah, yeah,
example?
yeah.
That's probably I think the score was marvelous and well that was definitely Hans Zimmer, but I mean aside from that, I used to really like other composers like for example Johan Johansson. I don't know if you
Hmm.
know him. He's
Yeah,
Icelandic.
yeah,
He was Icelandic. He yeah, there's one film that's called The Theory of Everything that's
yeah,
about
yeah,
I don't know if
yeah,
you've seen it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Stephen
Well, that one,
Hawking. Stephen
yeah,
Hawking. Yeah,
yeah, and that score was great. I loved it. Then he has done a bunch of other films like Arrival
yeah.
and a few others that doesn't necessarily relate, but his style is very like a like I think he really uses minimalism in a way that his music kind of like drives through the film in a certain way that I think works great. And just like him, there's been others, like for example Thomas Newman. I like Thomas Newman a lot. He's worked in many types of films, whether it is with Pixar or like detective stuff or like more drama sort of films. And he did this one film that's called 1917. Is the name?
Yeah.
Yeah, that one I really like that film, and the score is
Interesting.
also very interesting. Yeah.
So what do you
Uh,
what do you qualify as a good music score? Like, because
yeah.
for me like those examples that you given are very good because they actually like those scores like they kind of like I guess like transform the scene into like another like I don't know like, it gives it layers, you know what I mean? And
Mhm.
like it brings you to a whole new world like phonetically, but also like with the help of the visuals, there's a whole like complementary aspect of it. So what do you how do you define a good music score? Is it just like from what ear you like the song, or is it is it more than
Yeah,
that?
that's it, it's very hard to actually say what makes a score good because usually whenever I hear this question, I kind of ask the same question like, but in the opposite sense, like what makes a score bad, right?
Oh, okay.
Why? And it's because I think it's harder to identify when a score doesn't work
Hmm.
than when it actually works. And this is because usually when you hear music that works well on a film, sometimes you don't even notice it's
Hmm.
there, right?
Yeah.
And like a lot of people talk about Marvel when it comes to scores that work perfectly fine with the film, with picture, but sometimes you can't really remember the tunes afterwards after
Yeah.
you've seen it, right? But they still work fine. And I guess I mean it is good to always stay in like in a subtle level when
Hmm.
it comes to you don't want to like overpower the film, the
Hmm.
picture or whatever's first, I guess. But definitely the way you kind of like use your resources throughout the entire film score um, is definitely something that's gonna is gonna engage better with the audience
Hmm.
because that way you can save stuff for later. This is something that usually, I mean, that's like when you take a like a timeline of a film, definitely you're gonna have like a peak right here, or there's gonna be like a more intense moment later on, and there's release later on, whatever.
Hmm.
But you kind of have to like do something similar with the music, and it's not always necessarily stick to the picture the same way. So the way you use silence also is something that's very
Hmm.
critical when it comes
Interesting.
to. So to me, I guess it's like maybe how you use your music throughout the entire film and what moments I guess you decide in which moments you decide to actually bring new stuff in.
Interesting.
That can probably, because I feel like when you take a whole score, you take the whole thing as a, you kind of like evaluate the whole thing throughout the film. It's not just like one piece here and there.
Mm,
So I guess, yeah, to me, at least that's one of the most important things. Like, how do you use everything throughout the entire film?
mhm,
But yeah, I mean, because something else is that you don't necessarily need to be as empathetic with the picture all the time. And that's something else that usually is what makes me more interested in the score whenever I hear something that
mm.
I find very interesting, is because uh, usually the score kind of says something very different than what you're seeing on the picture. And
Interesting.
yeah, and that produces a different sensation when you're watching film.
Yeah, like
So
contrast.
that's,
He was like contrast essentially. Like,
yeah,
yeah, nice. So how do
it's
you
like, it's not
yeah,
obvious, you know?
yeah, it's like I know like there's a lot of films where they use like for example like The Dark Knight one of my favorite films where essentially each sort of like segment or each like sort of instrument, if you will, has a signature, and you know when that signature comes in when there's the new character that comes in. You know what I mean? Like it's
Hmm.
like for example, like The Dark Knight Rises. For example, you have the little spiccato sort of like little cat type of beat, and you know that Catwoman is involved in this scene. And you
Yeah.
have that very hard brass. You know that Batman is coming in with like the whole. But then for me, that's like the interesting thing about film scoring because like you could essentially introduce a character phonetically through music, and that's how I think. Like, for example, when I did my own scoring for my film, I try to like incorporate that. It's very much like
Yeah.
I'm very much a novice in comparison, very very bad. But like it's I try to like implement these sort of elements, and I don't know if you do that too with your scores, where you implement like signatures that maybe Hans Zimmer does, or maybe sort of
Hmm.
even I don't know if you know Ludwig Göransson because like he
Yeah, I
does.
was just I was gonna
Yeah.
mention him as well, but yeah.
So did you ever try and like kind of not copy, but like inspire yourself from these kind of like producers and implement their
Uh,
styles?
well, I guess, yeah, definitely copying is probably not the right word, but yeah, I mean, you always get inspiration from many, like whenever you hear a good score, and you sometimes, what I do is I just grab like a certain pieces of the score, and I try to analyze them to kind of like understand what's going on, like what's good
Mm,
about this, try to like understand it to a more deep level. And maybe like I've done that a lot with, for example, Johan Janssen and some other composers that explore a little bit more with experimental stuff. Uh,
mm,
I think Ludwig Göransson is a very interesting composer. I think that he's one of the few that really is bringing something new to the entire scene.
mm.
And I mean, it's just like after Oppenheimer, for example, I was just blown away, not just by the film, but the score was. I feel like it was marvelous, and the theme also, like the main theme that everybody knows. I mean, it's very interesting, like his approach to actually making that piece of music as a theme, or as what it was like. I think it was very very interesting, and yeah, definitely. But I guess it depends, because you always want to take some things of these composers, of these sources of inspiration, but maybe you don't want to take too much of that, right? Or if you want
Mhm,
to grab like a particular score uh, as an example or as a reference, maybe you have to be careful with not keeping that as your only reference, but
mhm,
instead you want to have like a few others that don't really relate to each other. So that
mhm.
way you're not entirely like, you're not just going into that direction, right? Because you
Mm,
risk going too much
yeah,
there, and then you're not really being, that's just gonna limit your possibilities a lot.
yeah.
So yeah, but I mean, we all do that. Like, it's always good to have references. It's just that, yeah.
So what is your approach to film scoring? Like, how do you start?
Well, yeah, well, I've definitely changed my process over the years. It always depends on what type of project you're working on. Because, for example, if you work with animation, or or live action, or maybe if it's like a TV series or whatever, their times are going to be different, and they have different stages in production, so you kind of want to keep up with that. And usually we all try to start with like in pre-production if possible, and just by reading the script or whatever source of just like um, whatever that kind of like explains the plot of the film,
Mm.
so that we can understand kind of like the main, well, the main characters, the main ideas, the general, I guess, concepts, and just elements that are gonna drive the film entirely. And uh, this way we kind of start off by just writing ideas without necessarily having any sort of like picture or visual reference, and that's always good because that really allows you to like experiment with a bunch of different options and not necessarily be stuck with the picture, right?
Mm.
So we always start like that, and we keep these ideas on the side, and then after we start getting some visual elements, like even if it's just rough cuts, or uh, well, then we can start try to like put all this together with the film and try to see if they work. And once we get an actual cut that we can work with, and that's somewhat time locked, well, we can start our entire process of spotting everything and identifying the moments where we're going to place the cues. This is something that happens all the time with the director and whoever's leading the project creatively. And that's when we start actually, making our mock-ups.
Mm.
And yeah, at least the way I do it is I just usually I try to always do my mockups as best as I can, like the most realistic way as possible. Even if later on we're gonna try to record most of the stuff, it's important that the mockup itself sounds good, so
Mm.
that it can be a good reference for the filmmakers as well, because
Mm.
that's what you want. Is you kind of want to show the music in the best way possible, even if it's just a mockup,
Mhm.
because that's how they can actually see if it
Visualize
works or
like
not.
yes,
Yeah.
it will. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So like do you actually write the song itself, or you have someone that scores it for you? Like yeah, writes
Uh,
it.
yeah, well, usually, I mean, I guess, of course, if we're gonna work with actual instruments, yeah, usually at the first stages, like I said, when you're working with just a script or just some sort of text, um, yeah, I try to write it as much as possible, even though
Mm.
when we're in the mock-up process, sometimes you just work with MIDI, right?
Yeah.
uh, and that's usually it's more time effective
Mhm.
because you don't have a lot of time. Sometimes in smaller productions, you tend to not have a lot of time, and so actually writing stuff like on the score, unless it's going to be played, it's not really something that you have time to do, right? And of course, you kind of want to have this ready before, if you actually gonna if you're actually gonna record all this music later on.
Mhm.
But but sometimes it's actually something that happens at the end, like before you're actually gonna go into the scoring stage, or look for the musicians that are gonna play your music. And sometimes you finish the mock-up, and then we move to making making the scores. And it's interesting because it happens after the entire mock-up process. So you kind of like created the entire music in MIDI first, and then you move it to score. But I think personally that it's not ideal, uh, because obviously real instruments sound very different than
Yeah.
virtual instruments, and
Yeah.
yeah. But it depends. It depends on the project, I guess.
So what instrument do you start writing your films on? Piano? Do you do like violin? Do you change
Well,
like
yeah. Well, I guess I forgot to mention. I mean, I did start off with the violin, but I moved on to, well, I switched to the guitar, but then I moved on to the drums, and I actually stayed
Mhm.
with the drums for a long period of my life. I guess that's the instrument that I kept with me, I guess, until today. The
Gotcha.
only thing is, yeah, when you're composing, you don't really play all the time. So yeah, and
Yeah.
it's interesting to actually write music with kind of like seeing it from the percussive perspective, I guess.
Mm.
So I'm not gonna say I use a drum kit to write music because I don't. But yeah, the piano definitely is what I use for pretty much everything, just like everybody else.
Yeah.
I mean, most of the composers they work with digital workstations and virtual instruments. Not only you work with the keys of the piano, but you try to, like link all these parameters that control the instruments to MIDI controlled knobs and faders.
Yeah.
And recently, I've been working with touch screens as well. To
Oh, so
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting thing that I think it's really changing the way we control virtual instruments. And
mhm.
I mean, yeah, it's all about how much control you can get of these virtual instruments, right? And that's
Yeah.
something that's constantly evolving. So
Yeah. So how do you come up with the ostinatos or the like the melodies, the main melodies of a score?
right. Melodies. Well, that's sometimes it takes a very long time, and
You
even if
just like
it's
kind of
just a
brainstorm, just gonna brainstorm, just gonna do
yeah,
random.
yeah, definitely it starts off as just
Okay.
brainstorming. Uh, Sometimes you kind of wanna be closer to the instrument you're writing for, because in a
Mm,
way you kind of, for example, if you're trying to write a theme or a motif, a melody that's gonna be played on the violins, uh, it's it's actually sometimes good to think that like what the violinist is going to be, how he's going to be playing this sort of,
mm,
because it's always better if you can get them to play it more comfortably, and it's going to sound a lot more natural if it actually, you kind of get this sort of like feedback from the instrument when
mm,
you're even making a melody for this instrument, because it's like the instrument kind of wants to be played in a certain way.
mm,
This is like more natural, and it's very, I think it's very important to actually think of the instrument you're writing for, because it can sound a lot better, and it can definitely improve uh, the sound quality in the recording session. It can, like if you're actually writing it properly for that instrument, I mean, whoever's going to play it later on,
mm,
they're probably going to take no time in playing it because it's going to be so easy, so smooth, right?
mm,
So that's definitely something very important. But yeah, brainstorming for sure. What I like to do often is I try to have as many options or alternatives as possible
mm.
for melodies, uh, and then I just see which ones work better. And it's like, but I start with like a lot of options, right?
Gotcha. Do you have a mental
Yeah.
do you have a you have a mental template of like what, for example, if it's a sad moment, you go minor, but you go have a specific key that you write in. Do you have is there like a you know something that like
Oh
fast
yeah.
forwards everything? You know what I mean? Do you have a key that you like to write in?
Uh, for some reason, B flat
Yeah.
is my go-to key, but I mean, I guess it changes all the time. I guess I have this thing with flats. I guess whenever I work with flats, it's easier for me, I guess, on the piano or something. It's not like I play brass, because usually like trumpet players, or
Yeah.
they kind of tend to go to these tonalities, to these keys, because they, I mean, well, I mean, trumpets are usually in that key, but um, yeah, but I don't know. I usually when I see how I see music, I guess it's more like kind of like a shape in its own that
Mm,
doesn't really relate to a key in specific, I guess. And I often start with like B flat, for example, but
mhm,
I mean, that doesn't really say anything to me usually. I mean, I guess I see it more as the shape of the melody or whatever it is, or harmonically how it's progressing,
mhm.
instead of actually like the key itself. But of course, like if you want to talk about modes and I guess harmonic structures, and yeah, definitely sadder moments are gonna be, I mean, minor. I always like to go a little bit of add a little bit of like modal interchange here and there, like not stay entirely minor, and
Gotcha.
kind of like switch it every now and then. But you can be very sad with major as well, or
Yeah.
you can be very emotional with major, is what I'm trying to say. And just like we were saying before, I mean, what's nice is to actually, perform something that could work in a sad instance of the film
Hmm.
with something that's not obviously sad in the music, like not necessarily
Hmm.
minor, but instead you go somewhere else, like Dorian or something. You
Interesting.
can definitely approach sadness with Dorian very well. And yeah, for example,
So like do you when you record the actual sessions themselves, do you know firsthand how many instruments are going to be played? For example, how many violins are going to be played? How many brass? How many percussive notes? Like, do you know like do you kind of cater the actual orchestra, right, curate the actual orchestra itself, or is it you talk to the director and you kind of like you go back and forth? Like, how does that process go?
right. Yeah, see, I haven't had many opportunities where I've actually been able to record with an orchestra, like a full
Mm.
orchestra, definitely, because that's something that takes a lot of budget, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
And yeah, so you don't really get that many projects. Like you don't get projects with like that allow you to record a full orchestra all the time.
Mhm.
It's actually, but yeah, for sure, this is something that has to be discussed with the production. Um, because the budget can vary a lot, depending on how many musicians.
Mhm.
And if the film requires a full orchestra, we're gonna want to have as many players as we can.
Yeah.
That's always gonna sound, but of course that makes the whole thing more complicated. You have more tracks, you have more, um, yeah, you have more just your entire arrangement sort of changes,
Mhm.
um, and the whole mixing process also. So yeah, that's but you see, you can actually the thing is you can do great things with smaller ensembles too, and
Mhm.
depending on the film, for example, you can work with simply like a string quartet and um and a few like synthesizers and things
Mhm.
like that, and other instruments that don't necessarily need to be recorded at a scoring stage.
Mhm.
And you can with a good production, you can actually create a great score. But of course, it depends on the film, because some films
Yeah.
definitely call for entire orchestra and something like that. But yeah, that's very. Whenever I've had to actually go to something like that, I end up just working with the mockup.
Okay,
And I
gotcha.
may record some of the main instruments that play the main melodies,
Yeah,
and then I just put those over, like I layer them on top of the other instruments. But
gotcha. So
yeah.
like so far, what kind of films have you what genre of films have you scored?
Yeah, for some reason I've been involved in horror films a lot. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's good because there's a lot of different emotions in a horror film, so
yeah,
it trains you everywhere, you know.
that's true. That's true. And also, I feel like it's a genre that's been often, um, I guess, it's a genre that you can. It's kind of hard sometimes to actually be original in a genre like that one where you're very like limited to certain things, and sometimes you kind of like have to stick to the horror on the musical effects on the entire soundtrack.
Mhm.
But this sort of like tension and suspense and horror and I guess sense of despair. Sometimes you can approach that also with different techniques that have not necessarily been used a lot in the past
Mhm.
in horror films. And usually for this type of things, I always go back to the Ari Aster films, like
Okay.
Midsommar and
Yeah.
Hereditary. I,
Interesting.
I love those. I love those. I love the score of those two films.
Yeah.
I used to like Midsommar a lot. I still do, but I mean the way, for example, they do horror. I mean the music kind of like portrays the horror on that film is very
Y-
interesting. The entire
Yeah.
film actually, but
Yeah. I mean, there's different types of horror. There's also psychological horror, and there's also like
of course, yeah.
actual like face to face horror. So I don't know. Like, do you ever? Because like, to me, when I talk about like horror films, the first thing that comes up is like either Jordan Peele or like
Hmm.
Scream. You know, what I mean, it's like it's very two different things. Where it's very much
Yeah.
like have you ever tried to like mix genres of music to score a these type of horror films? Like Jordan Peele, for example, has like a mixture of like R&B, but it's like embedded orchestral sort of
Yeah.
horror aspects, right? Where it's not purely orchestral or like like choirs and stuff like that. So have you ever
Hmm.
tried and experiment like that and see if it potentially could work?
Yeah. Well, not yet. I'm actually working on something at the moment that
Gotcha.
unfortunately I cannot talk a lot about that. But I mean, I'm starting to try to experiment a little bit more
Mm.
uh, on this particular project. But I mean, it's moving very slowly, so I'm actually in the stage where I'm kind of like thinking on what can I do to actually mix things up a little bit and kind of go
Mhm.
for something more like that. I guess
Mhm.
I think this is more of an elevated horror type thing, right?
Mhm.
That
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, and I think that's very interesting. I like that a lot.
Like
Like choirs.
you could sample like original, like I don't know, like original songs and then like twist it. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
the yeah. So I don't know if you ever tried sampling with I don't know, but with the orchestral scoring.
yeah. Well, actually, sampling. When it comes to sampling, what we've what I've done for this one horror short film that I did a few years ago. Actually, I remember I started working in Foley for it, and I
Mm.
was recording some, like pieces of wood and metal, like creaks and stuff.
Mhm.
And I remember we were in the studio, and we had this table where we laid we had all our like toys and objects on top of it,
Mhm.
and we dragged the table, and it produced this weird, like really like buzzing sound on the ground
Mhm.
that was very it sounded almost like a low drone. It was very good. Like
Uh,
we heard it and we were like,
gotcha.
that has to be on the film. And it was literally just dragging
By
the
accident.
table.
Yeah, yeah.
It was yeah. And we recorded it, and then later on, I was actually asked to work on the music for the short film. And I remember I used that sound. I sampled it in a certain way so that it could sound like a very low cello, like super rusty
Mhm.
cello, and that stayed in the film, and it's actually on the soundtrack, and it sounds like a cello
Oh,
that plays the melody. Yeah,
interesting.
it's very low. It doesn't sound too much like a cello, but it does at the same time, and it's actually just a big wooden table. You know one of those like super like
Yeah,
heavy tables that
yeah.
just yeah, and
Have you tried like have you tried with like because like I know a lot of producers nowadays they're doing the same thing. They're kind of like, for example, well, Kanye was a very like one of the first that did it, where he used voice as either percussive sound, and he
mhm,
used like in different octaves, made it very short, very long. Changed the sort of the pitches, but they also sometimes you use like birds as like a hi hat or whatever. There's like
mhm.
stuff like that. So have you ever tried like those type of things for like those type of horror movies or thought of it?
uh yeah,
Crows,
definitely
for
for
example.
sure.
Crows are like horror trope. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, no, that's very, very interesting, and it's true. It's true. And for example, you see that on Jordan Peele films as well.
Yeah.
Uh, but definitely, that's something like that. Sometimes when I hear that on some of these films, it's like it's weird because it doesn't necessarily sound horrific, but it
Hmm.
produces the same effect. And I remember when I watched The Witch. I don't know if you remember that one. There's a it's like a horror folk type thing.
Okay, gotcha.
The
Yeah.
Witch. It's yeah, but it yeah. There's like I don't remember the exact scene when you hear that, but it's like one of the most like horrific scenes where you actually see the like the monster, the witch in this case, or they get closer to her. You start hearing this weird like sound, well, that's
Oh,
very like clucky,
yeah,
and
yeah.
it's really just like a percussive, you know. But that's it, It sounds like I don't even know what it is, but
Like a clock almost.
sort of, yeah, but
Yeah,
it's like steady, and it's just that,
yeah,
and it sounds super horrific, and I think it works perfectly.
yeah.
And it's very, and I remember I tried to replicate something like that on another film, and I actually I mixed something. Well, I started off trying something like that, and in the end, I replaced that with just like inhales,
Okay.
like very very fast inhales and exhales that were like something
Yeah,
something very
yeah.
very, but it sounded very like guttural and very like
Interesting.
yeah, and that was sort of like what I kept for that one. It was like the most critical moment in the film where we actually got to see like the entity that was like creating all the chaos and everything.
Yeah.
And I had some other elements going like sounding at the same time, but
Mm.
that was the one thing that produced the most horror, I think, to me. It was this sort of like constant, like steady but accelerated inhales, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
like the inhales were more
It's kind of
uh
like a crescendo
relevant in this
essentially.
case.
It's leading to like something like a big
Yeah,
climax.
yeah, and it's actually percussive in a way. It's like there's a rhythm to it, right?
Yeah.
And it works great for horror. So I think that's very interesting. I'd like to explore more of that.
Have
Yeah.
you ever tried? Have you ever tried writing off key to make it sound more horrific? Because it's like you're just like something's wrong here.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, for sure. So yeah, for some reason I haven't done that much. I guess we tend to associate that with like I guess whenever you have like a like a an some sort of like entity in the
Like
film that's
yeah,
somewhat small or like a child or something,
yeah,
and you have this sort of like music box that just plays this tiny melody, and
yeah.
it's kind of like sounding off tune. I guess, yeah, I tried that a few times, but I mean not too much because I honestly I feel like in my case it sounded a little bit too cliche,
Gotcha.
but
Okay.
um yeah, but you usually use like clusters on
Mm.
like brass clusters or with other instruments, and that usually builds up tension very 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 effectively. So
Have you ever had
yeah.
an instance where you like you did your mock up and then like the director literally went 180 on the direction that they wanted to go? Like for them, they listened or they heard like your MIDI version, and you went like, "Nah, actually, we're going for a very different type of thing." Because it happens a lot when it comes to music production, like in general, when someone makes a song, they
Mhm.
usually think that oh, okay, we're going R&B, so we'll copy the same flow, but then the guy wants to change it up a little bit, or the girl wants to sing a little bit and then make it sound like a mixture of R&B, jazz, soul, but with a different. So
Mm.
have you ever had an instance where you and the director had like kind of a very different vision for where they wanted the production to go?
Uh, well, it hasn't happened to me a lot, honestly, but I do remember uh something like that. I guess kind of happens in this one a short film. It was like a documentary short film that I did a few
Mhm.
years ago with a friend of mine, where um, the director actually wanted the whole thing done with drums, just drum kit.
Oh,
It was just
okay.
that, yeah. And that was set from the start, actually. So, but at first, of course, my approach to it was a little bit more of, I guess I tried to make the drum kit sound like I wanted to sample a bunch of sounds that we could get out of the drum kit, like not that just the usual impacts and everything, but
Yeah.
like and I wanted to like pitch some of those sounds and actually create something a little bit more maybe atmospheric and maybe a little bit more tonal,
Mm.
for yeah. And actually, we talked about it a little bit more, and it was a short film about a box actually,
Okay.
and yeah, and the idea of using drums on this short film was that we wanted to kind of like imitate the same energy that the boxers usually use, I guess, when they're like in
When
the
they're
middle
hitting
of the
when they're hitting each
you kind
other.
of want to yeah you kind of want to have this adrenaline and just sort of
Mm.
like
Yeah.
constant.
Gotcha.
So that changed everything actually, and yeah, we ended up going for something more like rhythmical, and like we wanted something more of like patterns like here and there. We had motifs, and everything was like very like steady on the drums itself,
Mhm.
and we kind of wanted to like use some I guess patterns that would somehow indicate that we're like in an urban type of area, I guess, like something more reminiscent of like street fighting maybe.
Gotcha.
And we went to, yeah, we looked for like hip hop beats and stuff like that, and we ended up doing that. Yeah, that
Oh,
was
interesting.
yeah, it was cool. It was yeah, it's really good actually. Yeah.
Nice. So have you ever tried like, is there was there a film or an instance of a film where you actually scored something and you're like, and at the end you're kind of like, I wish I had taken another direction instead of this direction, or you were always confident from the start when you done, like when you composed. I mean, because like me, for example, when I make films myself,
Hmm.
when I watch or rewatch the film now, I'm like, I should have done this, should have done that. You know, it always happens to everyone because you grow as you move on, right? So has there been
Hmm.
an instance where, like, right after you've done the composition, you were like, damn, I should have done this instead of that, but now it's already too late because it's already out and all this stuff that happened. But has it happened?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it usually happens. I think it's happened to me all the time, honestly, but not because something, not because things don't really sound as I wanted them to sound, or, but because I guess I usually find myself in a situation where I feel like I'm constantly evolving,
Hmm.
and I think very differently. Like at least how I make music, I think very differently of it right now as I did last year, for example.
Hmm.
And I feel like I'm constantly, I guess, changing the way I'm approaching my music, and I actually, I mean, I like that because I
Hmm.
feel like I'm constantly, I'm not staying in the same sort of like state, creative state, I guess, when I approach a film. But I don't think I can mention a specific time when that happened to me, but definitely several times I felt like, okay, I could have probably tried to record this instrument um, with an actual musician, because sometimes
Mm, I
I've tried
guess.
to play some of the instruments I've used on my scores in the past, whenever it's something simple, of course.
Hmm.
And I've tried to actually perform things myself when it's just like a few notes, just a short motif or something.
Hmm.
And of course, it's always better if you actually get an actual player to do that, and you get their feedback. And
Yeah.
I guess usually I felt like, yeah, I could have probably used some of that feedback better. So yeah.
Gotcha. How long usually does it take you to score an entire film from start to finish?
Well, yeah, like a short film or
Let's say you done features.
I have, but definitely not too many. Yeah, well, features for sure take a lot longer, of course. But usually for features, I've had a lot of help whenever I've had to
Okay.
work on features. I've never
Okay.
worked in a feature just myself.
Hmm.
Yeah, so um, so that's the thing, because when you work on a project where there's a lot of people involved, uh, you're actually able to do things a lot faster. You
Hmm.
can actually focus on just writing the music, and you kind of like split by roles, right?
Yeah.
So you have somebody else doing the editing and the orchestration, and that definitely makes things a lot faster,
Hmm.
as opposed to when it is a short film. You kind of just have to do everything yourself
Hmm.
sometimes, and if it's a smaller budget as well.
Hmm.
But I mean, I guess for short films, it's been like from 1 month to, I don't know, I'm gonna say 3, 4 months maybe or
Got it.
something. And then yeah, features I would say maybe 6 months or something at
Hmm.
most. It could
Oh,
be
really?
a lot less, yeah. But if it's just one person, it takes some time, because then you have to move on to actually recording the instruments and everything. But
Hmm.
I mean, I've also been involved in features where we finished the whole thing in like 2 months or something, and sometimes that's all the time you get. So.
Interesting. So, like for short films, like the films that you made that are shorts specifically, like
Mhm.
how many songs have you done for that one short?
Right. Well, uh, it's always harder to. I guess I would say probably between 4 or 5.
Gotcha.
Usually, like
Okay.
whenever you, yeah, when you get to finish the whole thing and put it on a soundtrack album, sort of, you end
Yeah.
up with at most 4 or 5 tracks.
Yeah.
But it could definitely be a lot less than that, because in a short film you don't have enough time to develop as much as you would like to in terms of themes,
Yeah.
and right.
Yeah.
So
Do you segment it by scene, or how do you like separate them into different tracks?
uh yeah, more like scenes is like you kind of want to go to I guess the maybe the acts on
Okay.
the film on the
Okay.
story, I
Okay.
guess.
Okay.
Uh yeah, so usually you want to get something like in the middle, at the end, and something in from at the beginning, I guess.
Yeah.
Um um but yeah, it's always hard to like split whatever you do for a short film in four or
Yeah.
five tracks, because it can
Yeah.
be a little bit choppy, and you
Yeah.
don't want to, yeah.
For my my short film, the action film that I scored, it's about 20 minutes long, and like I developed a theme
Hmm.
that came in early on. It was kind of like the we call it the opening sequence, and then from there I kind of like segmented and then like kind of added orchestral elements and all that stuff, and
Hmm.
kind of how do you say, like I kind of developed a what would be the lead up to that theme, and then what would happen after the theme, and then like afterwards I also try to implement like, okay, what if this theme changed genres? Like, if funny enough, I essentially, because I used to be like really into drill, and like in drill music there's a lot of
Hmm.
like 808 slides,
Yeah.
and I implement that 808 slide into the orchestral with the orchestral melody on top. So
Okay.
it sounded very interesting because there's like a it's a drill orchestral, but it was kind of like it matched what was going on in the scene. You know what I mean? Like, cause like there's like a I don't know, like 808s. They're hard, but also they're kind of like they're flowy. So when the fighting started happening, it was flowing perfectly well with the strokes, and that's why I was like, oh, because it's quite interesting how like changing the genre or implementing a new genre within that orchestral main
Hmm.
melody could actually complement the scene and make it more of a an interesting sort of piece instead of just having like orchestral and like toms hitting every single
Hmm.
time the actors would hit each other. So that was like my instance of like that kind of incorporating different genres into my thing. But that's why like I was kind of
Yeah,
like
it's crazy.
I'm curious because like me, I segmented literally by scene. Like scene one has a song, scene two had a song, scene three had a
Hmm.
song. So
Yeah.
I was curious how usually you would cut like different genres, or like because I know like for example, Hans would make it for Pirates of the Caribbean, for example,
Hmm.
he literally made a theme just for Jack Sparrow,
Hmm.
which is very iconic, like everybody knows it, and like so that one character has its own theme, but it has it's a whole like a full on song. It's not just like a little piece here and there. So I'm curious, like how would you sort of cut, especially for a feature, because you work on features, like how would you like cut the amount of songs into the quote unquote album?
Yeah, that's always. I mean, I've always, I guess, changed my method of how I approach this type of cutting music for an album,
Mm.
because yeah, you kind of want to have a nice progression of how things, like, it has to be somehow related to the tracks on the film, but at the same time, you want it to be in the right format for an actual album that's going to be eventually on streaming and everything, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
the format, I guess, tells a lot. And I try to think more of the album itself, because it's going to be,
Mm-hmm.
it has to work on its own, right? It has to be
Mm-hmm.
listened by somebody who hasn't watched the film and anything.
Yeah.
So for that, I think it's actually a good approach to think of genres and probably scenes as well.
Mm.
But sometimes you just want to focus on the music, and maybe in my case, I guess I've tried to listen to music like completely separated from the film, and just
Mm.
like I
Yeah.
maybe I like erase the picture completely, and I just try to work with the music itself,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of like see what the music tells you. Sometimes you feel like, okay, this track somehow feels great, as like maybe the starting track of the album,
Mm-hmm.
or because it doesn't necessarily has to be like chronologically, right? So, but
Often it's
actually,
often
it's
often it's not. Yeah, often it's not.
yeah, of
Yeah.
course, yeah, yeah, yeah. But I mean, I think it's very interesting what you're saying, that the way you separate the cues, I guess, on
Yeah.
your productions has been usually led by the scenes, and yeah, definitely that's how it goes for most filmmakers, I think. But in my case, I mean, it's always been something that I've discussed with the filmmaker, with the director,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
The spotty session. So yeah, usually they have most of the say in those cases. So we just adapt.
Interesting. So,
Hmm.
like, is there, have you tried or want to try what would be like the genre of film? Because you've done horror now. What kind of genre of film would you want to try and tackle next?
Well, I it's been a while since I've worked with animation,
Oh, okay.
and yeah, like I've worked on that. Not too much, but I have, and I've always have a great had a great time with that. And usually, you know the stories they tend to be very different, and I would like to get more involved in that for sure.
Mm.
Um, of course, when we say animation, it could be any genre, but
Yeah,
I guess the way these projects kind of like work, and
but it takes time. It take a lot more time than like actual movies. You know.
yeah, you know yeah, there are a lot of more stages in between, and they require a lot more people involved. And
Yeah.
but yeah, that's one thing. Documentaries, I love documentaries.
Mm.
I love to work on that as well.
Interesting.
Um, and I once worked on a musical that it was a short musical film,
Hmm.
and it was great. I loved it, and it was the first time I ever did that. It was very challenging for me,
Hmm.
but I mean, I would love to have another chance to do that because it's very the whole thing is very different. You know, the whole process. I guess it's yeah.
Have you ever done like? Oh, I'm curious. What's the usual BPM for horror film? Is it like is there like a range of BPM, or is it just kind of like whatever the scene, however the scene goes?
What do you mean BPM?
But yeah, for example, yeah, for like because you know in action usually the flow is very fast. You know, you're very going like
Yeah. Uh,
do you write everything at halftime? You kind of do everything double time. How does like the
well,
timing go?
yeah, yeah,
Uh-huh.
I get it. Yeah, it's pretty interesting actually. I guess usually they tend to be a little bit slower.
Okay.
At least how I've done it, and yeah, in the cases that I've been involved in horror productions, I've always been more oriented to the slower paced type of
Mm.
um, yeah, tracks. But actually, it's interesting when you can actually like switch that to something a little bit more. For example, what we were talking about, this, like rhythmically driven
Hmm.
musical pieces that were great in horror films. I guess those are usually in actually fast BPMs.
Yeah, yeah.
I would say I'm not entirely sure, but I think and I think that works great too. So maybe it's not a lot about not it's probably not too much about the BPM itself, but it's you know I, I guess maybe how you do it, and depending on the scene because you have many types of I guess moods when it comes to
Yeah.
horror
Yeah.
and yeah.
The thing is, like, I asked this question because,
Mhm.
again, back to Jack Sparrow's theme. When you listen to like Hans
Yeah.
Zimmer's Jack Sparrow's theme, you literally hear the transition where it goes from very very slow. I'd
Hmm.
say even probably like 80 something BPM, and it double times real fast once the brass start coming in, and it goes.
Oh,
You know what I mean?
okay.
Like, so
Yeah.
I'm curious, like, how do you do you write with that in mind? Do you like, because obviously there's a scene
Mm.
like especially with horror, there's a big switch where like usually a character just is a showcase like there's something happening behind the scenes, and then it goes real fast, you know what I mean? So I don't know, I like, do you write in a specific BPM, or do you write fast and then you just slow it down later on? do you
Oh, yeah.
do
Yeah,
you
yeah,
write
yeah, yeah.
slow and you speed it up, like, yeah, what's the process like?
Well, usually when you have to write like more atmospheric type of
Mm,
ambiences, I guess that are gonna be they're gonna stay in the picture in the movie for a while. You kind of wanna. I've usually done those a little bit faster so that I can
mm.
write, um, at my regular like how I would normally do it, and then you kind of like
You play with it
switch the
later.
tempo, yeah, and then you
Yeah,
just like stretch it out and bring down the tempo, and then you get a large track that works perfectly fine, and it has like a
yeah,
melody within,
yeah.
but it's just stretched out, and you're able to cover as much as you have to, but it's well usually when you write music or film you're always making complicated tempo maps and
Yeah,
because you have to kind of like stay in sync when you work with picture, right?
yeah,
But in the case of the Jack Sparrow thing like you were saying, yeah, that's actually I think that's the type of things that come later on with the arrangements, and
Mm,
I would say I think it's more of how they wanted to develop the theme, and yeah, I would say it's something that happened later on. Like the music was written like at a probably a one tempo,
mm,
and then they decided to do that. But I mean, I guess I mean you're always gonna be switching the tempo here and there because
mhm.
it's yeah.
So, what DAW do you use for music composition?
Well, I like Cubase a lot.
Okay.
Yeah, so I work with Steinberg is
Mm,
a company that and they have Cubase, Nuendo as well as pretty much the same. And I think it works great because it has a lot of like nice tools
mhm.
for time stretching and to kind of like um, sync your MIDI to picture.
Yeah.
So that's why I like it the most.
You
And
tried
I use it
others?
for mockups.
You tried others? You've tried others for
Yeah, not that many actually. I haven't. Well, I also work with Pro Tools a
yeah,
lot.
Pro Tools and Logic are kind of like the two like a lot of people use for like
Yeah, t- because mostly, I mean, because Pro Tools is like a industry standard, so you kind of
mm,
have to, even if you don't like it. But I used to not like Pro Tools for some time, but actually I find it very useful now. But of course,
mm,
you use it for audio,
mhm.
and in my case, I use that for audio and Cubase for MIDI,
Gotcha.
and yeah, that's basically it for me. I guess at the moment, that's I feel like that's enough. Uh, I don't
Yeah.
really feel like I need to work with any other
It
DAW at
works.
the moment. Yeah.
It works. It works. So like
Hmm.
maybe before last question, what is your dream collab? Who's the composer you wish you could work with if you had the chance on a project together? What would be like your dream collab, and who would that composer be?
Well, yeah. Yeah, that's crazy. Well,
There's so many, I think.
yeah, yeah. Well, definitely Ludwig Göransson. It's. I mean, I think he would be probably number one
Yeah.
in my case. I mean, I feel like it's very inspiring and I'm very motivated by how he's sort of like shifting the entire way of making music for film. I feel like
Mhm,
I mean, I think it's very important um, to consider his way of making music,
mhm.
and when it comes to making music for film. And after that, I mean, I guess there's another composer that I like a lot. His name is Lawrence Dangle. He's German. He's not very well known, but
Mm,
I guess I would say his style is a little bit related to Johann Johansson.
mm.
Um, I mean, of course, him as well. Then, uh, well, he passed away a few years ago, so yeah.
Mm.
But
Yes.
I would say them too. Definitely, like I said, I was very into the music of Thomas Newman for
Yeah.
some time. I think he's worked in a lot of films so far, and I'd like to try to be kind of like
His
carry his
protege.
legacy in a way,
His
sort of.
protege. Yeah.
In a
Got
way, yeah.
Gotcha. So like what would be your your film composer end goal essentially? What would be like would it be to compose for a large blockbuster like Marvel, like would it be like to promote to compose for a specific director, a specific genre? What would be your dream as a film composer?
Mhm. Well, Will wants the best score Oscar, of course. Uh,
Okay.
but I wouldn't say that's my end goal, definitely. I think it's a great question, by the way. Because yeah, you kind of want to transcend the entire sort of like award,
Yeah. It comes with the territory,
driven
but
sort of.
it should be
Yeah,
your angle. You know what I mean? Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. And in the end, we just want to make great art and
Hmm.
we make great productions that are gonna maybe change the way we do things, I guess. And that's what I was saying, about the music of some of these composers that
Yeah.
we've talked about. And definitely, I guess, yeah, like I used to think when I was younger, I remember I want to create a new genre of music. That was like one of my
Yeah. That's
goals when I
nice.
started in music school. And I was like, I had no idea how to do it. Like I had no like specific, I guess, um inspiration or something, but I just felt like I that's what I wanted to do. So I guess by now I would say like I want to create something that eventually like people could actually enjoy and relate to, but
Mm,
also that's gonna sort of like change the way we do things and kind of contribute to the evolution of this whole
mm.
field, right?
Yeah, as actually, it's a good question because I want to know as for someone who is like a novice, what would be your tips in like like if someone wants to be like a film composer like yourself, like what would be your tips for this person? Would you go to school? What did you do? Would you like advise them to learn an instrument, be the best at the instrument, to
Mhm.
follow a specific types of film composer? What would be your advice for the people who actually want to follow the same career as you?
Well, I mean, definitely schools is a great place to not only to learn but to make connections. Later
Hmm.
on, that's gonna help a lot to find opportunities
Hmm.
and then I think the best way to actually learn how to do this job is by actually getting your hands dirty and working on actual projects, even if it's just unpaid, like school projects or whatever. Usually those don't tend to be so demanding, so you can actually uh, maybe work on those while you're students. And I think that's the best way to actually learn how to do these things. And
Hmm.
also, you kind of contribute to, I guess, staying close to the filmmakers or the creatives that are going to be creating films later on,
Hmm.
and like actual, large productions. And if you stay close to them, you can
Yeah.
actually have like a nice power duo or something with
Yeah.
I used to think that was a good plan, and I still think it is. um but yeah, I mean, stay in school and definitely listen to a lot of music, like different
Hmm.
genres, like don't stay in one genre
Hmm.
or in one style of music. uh it's like reading books, you just grab a new album from specific like style of music from whatever, and
Yeah.
you're gonna learn a lot from that,
Yeah.
so it's a way to like expand your horizons. I think that's
Yeah.
the best thing you can do as a composer. Then
Yeah.
yeah.
I definitely agree. I think sticking to one genre. I mean, for me, for example, I literally like for a long time I was into rap, and I just got really bored of it, so I had to like really expand. I got into
Mhm,
like, you know, actually funny enough, I got into like really music composure, composition for the same way. It's kind of like I started listening to other things, classical. I was like, okay, that's kind of interesting, but then they added also with, this new wave of like there's it's Afrobeat, but it's not really Afrobeat. There's
mhm.
this there's like pop, but it's not really pop. I mean, pop is not really a genre, but like there's different types of subgenres, if you will. And
Yeah.
then listening to those subgenres is kind of interesting because when you go back all the way to the roots, they all kind of
Hmm.
come from the same roots, but then just kind of expanded.
Exactly. Right.
So that's an interesting take on it. So yeah, so thank you, Rodrigo, for being on the podcast. If you want to promote any projects, I know you can't talk about the project you're currently working on, but projects you already worked on that are already out. So you want to promote them by all means. Promote.
Yeah. Well, thanks first of all. It was great. Thank you so much for having me. um well, at the moment, I don't think I have much to promote. But I mean, I guess stay tuned. I'll be releasing stuff for sure. I have some music on Spotify for sure. It's on my name. A couple of my projects are there, and I guess for now that would be it. Yeah,
All right, so like, I'll just send me your Spotify link. I'll put it in the description below, as well as
of
the
course.
the podcast is also on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts, so you guys can listen to it on at Newcrown Studios. And we're next episode will be the Christmas episode, and it'll be our final episode for this season. So stay tuned for more next year. Thank you very much again for being on the podcast, and see you guys next time.